Hello and welcome back to the plenary 3 session of Equip 23. The first 3 days have brought us a variety of topics, and today also no exception. We have an interesting panel discussion on something which is very close to our heart. May I request all to mute their mics if when you are not talking. Yeah, so we are back to this interesting session today where we'll have a panel discussion on a topic which is close to all our heart with the effects of the COVID, particularly in state. So today's session will take place in Iravati Karve Hall. Iravati Karve was a pioneering Indian sociologist, anthropologist, educationist, and writer from Maharashtra. That's the state where I come from. She's been claimed to be the first female Indian sociologist. She has many things to her claim, and you can read all about it on our Hall of Fame book. But I would bring out one connection. Many of you heard talk by Dr. Priyadarshini Karve yesterday, and Priya is granddaughter of Iravati Karve. And we were really fortunate to have her also in this meeting, and it's quite a unique coincidence. So with this now, I invite Professor Lilia Meza Montes to conduct today's session.
Thank you, Vandana. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good night. Welcome to our plenary session 3. Impact of COVID-19 on the scientific ecosystems. In 2020, the International Union of Pure and Applied Physics wrote, IOPAP reflection on the impact of COVID-19 relating to women, medians, and carbon footprint. I'm going to read that quotation. Start quote. IOPAP sends heartfelt best wishes to the international physics community in these difficult times of COVID-19. As we negotiate them, we are reminded of the importance of science, scientific expertise, and of evidence-based decisions. We are also reminded of the importance of shared, reliable information and collaborative efforts on a global scale. That to address our problems of the 21st century, we need the diversity of thought and approach with transparency of ideas across borders and boundaries. We also recognize the bravery of our healthcare worker heroes on the front lines and those scientists working tirelessly to understand, combat, and recover from this global pandemic. We also note that the extra work besides scientific activity, usually done by women, taking care of children, of education, of domestic tasks, penalizes those who perform this task with much more during the COVID-19 period and just after. We expect that increased awareness by everyone will lead to establishing multifaceted criteria for appointments and promotions that take these aspects into consideration. End of quote. To this aim, we have organized this panel. Along the pandemic, several studies emerged, particularly on the impact of the pandemic on women. The purpose of this panel is to learn about some of these studies and reflect on how to remediate the negative impact of the pandemic on our physics community. We have the participation of 3 distinguished panelists with us today, Professor Vibhuti Patel, Dr. Bahar Mehmani, and Professor Frances Separov. Welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation. In the panel's first part, Professor Patel gives an overview of the impact on women in general. Then Dr. Mehmani talks about research on Elsevier journals. Afterwards, we open the panel for a short session of questions and answer. Please write them in the section question and answer or in the chat. We continue with the presentation of Professor Separovic, who will describe a project developed in the Asia-Pacific region. After this, we have again a session of question and answers and open the panel for comments in general. Said this, let us start. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Iravati Patel. I will introduce her. Please, if you can put the slide. Professor Iravati Patel is a retired professor of Tata Institute of Social Sciences and Srimati Nathewal Damodar Thakursi, Women's University, Mumbai, and currently Vice President of Indian Association for Women's Studies and Honorable Distinguished Faculty at Impact and Policy Research Institute, Delhi. She is co-editor of Gender Inequalities and Paid and Unpaid Work of Women. She has authored Women's Challenges of the New Millennium and an intersectional gender discourse on empowerment during pre and post COVID-19 pandemic. She has co-authored of Indian Women, Change and Challenge, Reaching for Half the Sky. She's editor of 2 volumes, Discourse on Women and Empowerment, and Girls and Girlhoods at the Threshold of Youth and Gender. She is editor of a peer-reviewed quarterly journal, Question Education, and co-editor of an interdisciplinary women's studies annual journal, Urba Mola. I hope I pronunciate it well, all the Indian names. So we welcome Professor Iravati Patel. Please.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Lilia Mazi-Pontes and my co-panelists, Dr. Bahar Mahmani and Francis Separovic, and the organizers of this team, Subrati Goswami and Dr. V. Madhurima. It makes me really, it's a very humbling experience to be in the midst of such senior scientists. But I also am very proud that Dr. Iravati Karve, who was a registrar of our university, and her book, Yuganta, where she has deconstructed women's role within the epics of Mahabharata and Ramayana, that has always been my Christmas gift. I keep bulk copies of it. So it is a fond memory that I'm sharing. And now my presentation is about women in an overview of impact of pandemic on women. And I have been involved in both participatory action research as well as involvement in the back-end work for the relief operations and social solidarity work, which happened during the pandemic by the young activist. So first of all, whenever we talk about pandemic and epidemic, the first memory that comes is of a first teacher of Indian modern education is a Savitribai Phule, who died while nursing the bubonic plague patients in the containment zone during the early part of 20th century. And this is also another experience is that of the memories, very, very painful memories of Spanish flu that we had. And in 1994, my own home state, Gujarat, we had a bubonic plague in Surat city, and we have seen with our own eyes what can happen when such a major tragedy, health emergency takes place. And the same thing happened during the global pandemic. And when in India, Bombay was a hotbed of the pandemic, and in terms of even finding the challenge or solutions and also intervention. We know the corrupt forces and those who wanted to take advantage of this emergency, they were there. But despite that, the social solidarity, involvement of health workers, healthcare system, public healthcare system, and the social activists was very important. Women, people who say that COVID doesn't differentiate between rich and poor and man and women, but that's not true. It's the social location of a person that decided accessibility of the services, the living condition, and the response to the pandemic. So what we saw that women in formal sector, they which happened to be only 6%. Even ILO says that globally it is only 6% of the women who are getting protection of protective labor legislation. They had a, I would call it luxury of a work from home, while 94% of the women in the workforce who were in the informal sector, they had to work. But still, women in formal sector had to do housework along with childcare, homeschooling, and office work without any support of domestic help, which happens in the developing countries. I know that in the industrialized country, everybody, only family members do domestic work. What we saw was a major problem that the 92% of the workforce space who were, or who after the lockdown, they did not get their living wages. They did not have, 60% of them were the migrant workers who were away from their home. They did not have money to pay rent, and all of them, like nearly 30 million people, they started walking back, which is called reverse migration. And you must have seen some of those very heart-wrenching photographs and videos of what happened to them. So what we saw, that the most vulnerable of the women who were the women-headed household, 11% of the household in the economy everywhere, they happen to be managed by single women, widowed, separated, deserted, and women who face long-term male migration, who are away from that. People with disability, senior citizens, lonely elderly, pregnant women, homeless people, or a transgender community who were socially excluded, who had no access to, even trans cis women did not even have access to menstrual pad, or if they happen to be pregnant, the doctors refused to even look after to provide healthcare services. And the sex workers who were faced tremendous social stigma during the pandemic and no relief kit. In fact, most of the philanthropic institutes would put a caveat: no, our relief kit should not be given to transgender persons and sex workers. We had to really fight back and find alternative. The state intervention of providing cash, which was also with so much of paperwork were demanded that most of them could not, hardly 9 to 10% of them got it. Another thing was we need to unpack this term called social distancing. First of all, we have a very, 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 very disturbing history of slavery, apartheid, and caste-based segregation. Within that context, if we use these terms to social distancing, it has a political meaning. And that's why there was an uproar from the African countries and even from South Asia that we should not use the term social distancing because it has a heavy baggage of prejudice and segregation. Instead, we should use it body distancing or physical distancing, which later on WHO sent this thing. UN Women was continuously giving press notes about the situation because they had data on 204 countries who were facing this thing. And they said that women have borne the major burden of the pandemic and also profound effect it has had on their income, on their health, on their nutrition, on their reproductive rights. And that is what we saw, that intersectional inequalities in the labor market, product market, and the factor market, everywhere we saw that women were ones who suffered the most, mainly because they did not have any access and the access to the services provided by the state, because there was a gender blindness in the approach of the state. Even the whole discourse on migration was only focusing on male migration, while we have nearly 30% of the migrants happen to be women. Even the data on migration talks about women migrate due to marriage, but women also, wherever, even after marriage, they work. Women migrate for education, women migrate for job. That was not there. So data was another very important gender desegregated data. That was a very important demand which was made by the women's organizations world over. What we saw that WHO also acknowledged that 70% of the healthcare workers were women, either as a scientist or technician or nurses or sanitation workers or auxiliary nurses, but none of them were given PPE kit. They were the frontline workers. In fact, our ASHA workers, they got the award from WHO as the best frontline workers in COVID. So I think that, and they were managing this work, very hazardous work with homemade mask. As you can see, all these are the photographs of the pandemic. None of them were given personal protection equipment. And another thing was that migrant workers challenge. We have a laws on migrant workers. International Labour Organization has also come up with a very detailed this thing about the rights of the migrant workers, but completely the employers completely got away with anything. No accountability was shown. In fact, the migrant workers, whenever they tried to call their employers for the back wages at least, they did not pick up the phone. So what we call is wage theft. Their wage was theft. They had really worked and they were not compensated. Another thing with those who were at the bottom of the pyramid, they also suffered the most because none of the relief operations, because mainly everything was happening digitally. Everything was happening where you had any connected. And those who did not have connection with either their political representatives or the local self-government bodies or the digital connectivity, they were left out. These are the scenarios which are taken by the citizens. Citizens have taken these photographs and they were sharing them on WhatsApp group, how the lonely elderly woman, she walks for 200 miles and others who are walking from between 200 to 1200 kilometers, people were walking with their children, and were given the people with disability. There were people were using roads and they were using forest, and they were going through the railway track. 16 people on 8th of May, they died because the goods train, it walked over them. They were sleeping after they got tired, and they all were, and everywhere there were nothing but the chapati was spread all over. What we saw that the road accident, suicide, train accident, trafficking of women and children, which happened in a big way. Now also, this year we are getting city-wise data where it shows that in city like Mumbai, there are 400 girls are missing in 1 year, or in other Bangalore, there are 450 girls. So everywhere we see a lot of missing children and especially missing girls. And we also saw some of these heart-wrenching photographs and videos on the shared by the citizens. Other level, what we saw that citizens organizations, professional bodies, neighborhood organization, senior citizens organization, they voluntarily started community kitchens. Here you can see that this is school, university students, teachers, all of them were involved in people-to-people level solidarity. That was a very unique thing that we experienced during this thing. Migrant workers, the shelter homes which were created by the voluntary organizations with the help of corporate social responsibility, there too these migrant workers, homeless migrant workers, they were not sitting idle. They were also volunteering to make the food, and very democratically. Some of these kitchens were run very democratically because they were sensitive to their food and their illnesses and specific diet for children and tuberculosis patients. All these things were taken care of because of the participatory processes. We have this Interstate Migration Act, and I think most of the countries who have accepted ILO's covenants, they have it. But what you see is that gross violation of this interstate, and now migrant workers who are always seen as a pain on the economy, sponge on the economy, first time that they are seriously rethinking about the role of migrant workers in building the economy, because the economy collapsed when there was a reverse migration. So within this also, we saw so many countries came up with extremely harsh wage codes, which took away 200 years of the collective bargaining rights with the working class had, and in the name of the economy suffered during 2 years. So they became more and more stringent. All labor standards and the human rights of the workers were eroded, against which the trade union movement and the social movement, they approached the UN body, and finally the intervention took place. What we see is the gender pay gap has widened. The studies of Australia, recently the book which has come out of working women in Asia and Pacific also shows that gender pay gap has increased. Sexual harassment at workplace of informal this thing, because the whole system had collapsed. They could not report. Later on, the online grievance redressal channels were created. Occupational health and safety. In fact, the international global mobile company, there were so many wildcat strikes where the young women are employed. Women in the global garment factories, they have also gone on strike during this thing, because all the labor laws, they were freezed during the pandemic. So they had no other democratic way of solving the problem through collective bargaining. What we saw was the women in the farms. The farm sector was the only one which had a positive growth rate, because Mother Nature was kind. And we had reported some 11%, 7%. Most of the countries had seen that. But problem was that the ready crop could not be transported because of the breakage of the supply chain. And we also saw that so many of them, police also used very brutal violence against farm workers who were trying to go to the farm. And it is in this context that we say that women farmers also had now, especially in the Asian countries, they have got organized and they have come up with their demand for their better living wages, better working condition, and occupational health and safety. And women say that acknowledgement of women as farmers, because we always talk about women in the agrarian sector as a farmer's wife, farmer's daughter, farmer's this mother, but we don't call her farmer. So recognition of women as a farmer, because at one level, the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, says that future of food sovereignty is rest on the hands of women. So women in the subsistence sector are playing very important role. Same happened to the forest dwellers, because none of the healthcare facilities could reach them. So even the incidences of COVID were also limited, but whatever they had produced, whatever they had collected from the forest could not be sold because of the pharma industries. And so many of them, they take the raw material, whatever the herbs and fruits and leaves and stems which they collect, around 900 products which they collect from the forest. The question on paid and unpaid work became extremely crucial in the context of added burden of unpaid work. And we saw that except for all Fortune 500 companies, among them, there were only two companies, Swiggy and Tata Steel, who acknowledged the unpaid work done by women during the COVID, and they gave special leave. None of the other companies, they gave special leave. On the contrary, so many women, like 40% of women who were in the workforce before pandemic, in a pre-pandemic period, they are out of workforce because they could not report to work, or they could not even work from home because there were so many health emergencies in their family. The first thing that happened is that right from UN, in STRAW, the statistical wing of the UN, and several countries, they came up with currently 84 countries are doing time utilization study. How much time in 24 hours that you spend on what kind of activity? Personal work, that is taking bath or brushing your teeth, that is personal work. Care work, cooking, cleaning, carrying, collection of fuel, fodder, water, kitchen gardening, animal care, all this. And third work is a wage work. And you can see that women are doing 10 times more work. At least in India, an Indian woman spends 299 minutes a day for unpaid work, while men spend 99 minutes. And similarly, we have data of all the countries around the world. So the question, the new slogan that emerged during pandemic and post-pandemic period, 3 Rs. Redistribute work. It is not only a women's job to do unpaid care work and housework. Everyone in the family has to do it. Recognize the value of care work, so that those who are doing paid care work, they also get better wages. They should, like domestic workers or those who are looking after ill or sick or elderly people, and reduce the care work through labor-saving technology. So it's a very important, and so many elderly people, I saw that because the domestic help was not allowed, so many of them started using washing machines and robots and Alexa and all that for their work, the elderly. The question is the most important challenge that we faced during pandemic was regarding reproductive health services, because the wards, every medical facility was geared to only pandemic related issues. Those who had comorbidities and those who had reproductive health issues, they were not listed in essential work. So even maternity wards were converted into corona ward. And that's why you saw so many women delivered babies on the road, in the home, in the while those who were doing reverse migration, they delivered baby. 18 women delivered babies in the running trains when they were going back. What we saw, we don't have data on miscarriage, unsafe delivery, stillborn babies, neonatal care, maternal mortality, maternal morbidity, self-delivery, and the child mortality. We just don't have data because everything was freeze. So even the Ministry of Health in India, they said they had data of only 17.47% of the children and 24% of women who were pregnant. So that data gap, that how many of them need polio vaccination, how many of them need antenatal care or a postnatal care, without data, you are shooting in the dark. And then comes to the question of starvation, very important, SDG goal number 1, the starvation. In first time, we saw such a mass scale starvation in rural, tribal, and even urban areas. Even those, this is a very stark reality. And I think countries after countries, they faced it mainly because it was not that there was food shortage, but because of the breakage of supply chain. The supply chain, so in future, whenever such emergency happens, we need to take care of this essential work. The question of fisheries, fisher folks also, they suffered. Whatever they collected, those in the coastal region, they could not sell their fish. The shelf life is very limited. So women fisher folks, they also faced tremendous economic hardship. Same happened with the cottage industry, which is the largest employer of women in Asian countries, because cottage industries, handicraft industry, they also suffered the most. Feminization of poverty became more accentuated. There are global data, there are Oxfam report, there are World Hunger Report, UN Women's Report, which shows that this kind of a deprivation and helplessness resulted also into sexual exploitation. The forced labor of child labor, forced marriages, child marriages, and trafficking of women and children, that also happened in a big way. Economists were screaming loud that economy is closed, but we feminists, we said that every economy is not closed. Care economy is very much there. Only the market economy is closed. So everyone is cooking, cleaning, taking care of their loved ones, and it is not just valued by the economists because it is not paid. And some of the shadow pandemic, what UN called violence, gender-based violence as a shadow pandemic. So we had a shadow pandemic in the form of child marriage, forced marriage, child labor, domestic violence, sex-selective abortions, because PCPNDT Act, which criminalizes sex-selective abortion by using ultrasonography machine in all South Asian countries, that was also freezed because during the pandemic. Sexual violence, child sexual abuse, trafficking, cybercrime, trolling, and cyber stalking. There are nearly more than 400,000 distress calls were made within 1 year to the National Commission for Women, and out of which 25% of the call, 1 in 4 calls, was by the adolescent girls who were forced into either marriage or being sold. So what we saw, that the women's movement, they created so many support systems, because during the lockdown, you could not personally go with the police helplines. They could only help over phone. So the whole mechanism was created to deal with the gender-based violence, because in the normal course, survivor of those who are facing violence, they can run away, they can ask for help from the neighbors. But during the pandemic, it did not happen. You were in the proximity of the abuser, and that time the telephone helpline were very, very important to ensure connectivity with the police. So many organizations, both the state and non-state actors, they uploaded mobile numbers of their organizations so that 24/7 women in distress could call them. Educational institutions like SNDT Women's University or TISS or IIT Delhi, they also created such helpline for stranded migrants, for the workers, for the women, lonely, elderly, for people with disability, for transgender person, for sex workers, they were said. So communication, dialogue, aided by technology, relief operations, and the resource generation, and also the state, from the ground level experience, creating appropriate policy, they were considered to be the most effective way of dealing with the organization. The women's movement globally, it demanded certain measures from the state in terms of, and the UN women also took lead, and there were meetings in Paris and Mexico about how to empower women, whatever the wheels of history which were turned back by the pandemic, because so many, more than 300 million girls are out of school because of the pandemic. African countries, it is more so. Even so, how to bring them back? Whatever we have achieved due to efforts of person like Iravati Karve or Savitribai Phule, we should not turn back. 3 crore, that is 30 million Indian girls were out of school because they had no digital connectivity. Women health seekers, even for them, in future, we need to have advisory and the SOP so that this kind of painful experiences don't report. Community-based organization, NGOs, government need to work with them because they played a very heroic role during this thing. The new challenges that we are facing in terms of platform-based work, temping, automation in manufacturing sector, artificial intelligence, and we need to take into consideration equal weightage has to be given to care economy, and to see to it that the skill gap that we are finding doesn't come in the way of women's work. The way our organization also intervened in terms of like we work with adolescent girls, and they all were doing the mapping, whatever research methodology we have taught them about the need assessment and the micro planning, they were applied to identify specific needs of different segments of people in terms of resources, in terms of medicine, in terms of special food, this thing. So that is very important. Reduction of social inequality in care services is extremely important demand that has emerged globally, because for justice, equity, and dignity and equitable relationship, it is very important that civil society organizations, local self-government bodies, they who were at the front line of the pandemic, their experiences are documented and their voices are amplified. Safety and personal protection, water and sanitation, and labor helpline, helpline not only for the survival of violence, but even when such emergency takes place, we should have a specific helplines in regional languages so that people who are stranded, they get proper guidance and predators don't take advantage of them. The economists globally have suggested wages and cash transfers, that means expansion of fiscal measures, very, very important in the post-pandemic world, because there are people world has enough, and we can we can tax pandemic profiteers, especially the 12 international multinational companies who have gained massive amount of profit, especially in the e-commerce sector, platform-based work, and the digital work. They should be charged. And I think some of the Latin American countries passed these resolutions in the parliament. In G20 dialogues also, it happened that people should be compensated by taxing the profiteers. Education is a major challenge we are facing in the post-pandemic world, especially the last stage, connectivity, because now it is a hybrid mode, 40% online and 60% offline, and the pandemics are going to be endemic. So a lot of reorganization in education is happening, and we should see to it that those who are at the margin of the society are not left out. Another thing is that some of the massive programs for employment generation, we should see that they are judicially implemented. This bar chart shows how much nation states have spent at the time of this health emergency, and it shows that most of the countries, especially Japan, have spent 42% of GDP to address the challenges of pandemic, and some of the countries have, like Germany 20%, France 14%, India spent only 10%, while the WHO had requested all the nation states to allocate at least 10% of GDP to meet the challenges of the health emergency. So I think that is also very important. Another thing is that pandemic has a big tax, and the e-commerce sectors, they have benefited exceptionally from COVID, and I think we need to their conscience should be raised to ask them to contribute more to deal with the challenges of the post-pandemic reality. So another thing is about the gender budgeting. Gender responsive budgeting is very important. Currently, more than 80 countries are implementing gender budgeting in European Union, US, Canada, some of the African countries, Asia, and Asian countries. And there also minimum 6% of GDP should be allocated to reduce the gender gap in 5 crucial areas: education, health, employment, gender-based violence, and decision-making. The major outcry that has happened is that though women are at the forefront of such health emergency, they don't have decision-making power. And I think WHO came up with a special report on women in leadership in the health sector. These are some of the references. All of them are in public domain. These are I have shared even the links of these articles, and I have used them for this presentation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make this overview for this August audience.
Thank you very much, Professor Iravati Patil, for such a detailed analysis. Thank you very much. A lot of information to discuss later. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Bahar Mehmani. Please. Okay. She oversees the peer review strategy of Elsevier journals and is the chair of the recently launched peer review workbench, hosting a unique manuscript and peer review dataset, allowing for running research on research evaluation. She received her PhD in theoretical physics from the University of Amsterdam and moved to the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Light to pursue her academic career as a postdoc. She joined Elsevier in 2013 as a managing editor with the goal of improving the peer review process, and since then has studied peer review as a scientific research topic. Bahar is the chair of the European Association of Science Editors Peer Review Committee. She also serves as an advisor for the National Information Standard Organization, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, Professor Bahar, and please, over the microphone, please.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the invitation. I feel humbled to be among you all. And thank you so much, Iravati, for the excellent presentation. I don't think I can add anything to that. What I will share with you is the study that we ran on Elsevier journals to see the impact on women, which was brilliantly presented by Vibhuti in the earlier session from publishing perspective. So if I can start, yes. So the talk is about the impact of COVID-19 lockdown measures on women academics. I'm going to tell you about the objectives. After Vibhuti's presentation, you don't need any explanation on that. I'll explain what methods we use and the observations, analysis that we did, and the results and conclusions and suggestions. Obviously, there are some limitations in any study. Ours is not excluded. And I will also introduce you to the peer review workbench and invite you to join. I remember early 2020, around April, some editors started to voice their concerns that they realized that the number of submissions coming to their journals from women is decreasing. And since then, also, I read a few editorials in different journals published by different societies and publishers voicing that concern, but there was no evidence-based and larger-scale study on that. That was the reason we started to look at all Elsevier journals data to provide a clear evidence and statistically robust analysis on any impact it can be. and not by looking into one journal or a small group of journals, but into a larger scale journals across different disciplines. And I did this together with my co-authors, who are three researchers from different universities: Professor Flaminio Squazzoni from University of Milan, Professor Francesco Grimaldo from University of Valencia, and Professor John Giacomo Bravo from University of Linnaeus. And the QR code of our paper, which basically provides you with everything that I am presenting here, is also available on the slide for you to check it out. The observations was that we looked into the months of February to May, the weeks 6 to 22, which were more or less the lockdown times across the globe in different countries. And we looked into those months in the corresponding years before 2018 and 2019 to create a baseline. Elsevier publishes a lot of journals across different disciplines. We took 2,329 journals. As you can see in the first row of the table below the slide, we had 885 journals publishing in health and medical sciences, 416 publishing in life sciences, 767 in physical sciences and engineering, and 261 journals publishing in social sciences and economics. And then we started to look into the individual submission and peer review behavior during this months I mentioned, February to May 2020, and the corresponding months in 2018, 2019. And we found out that in total, we are dealing with 5 million academics that either have listed as an author and reviewers in these periods of months. Then we looked into each individual's email addresses and tracked their academic performances across different journals to construct an auto-generated anonymous unique identifier. We did not want to go into details of people, so we wanted to work on anonymized data sets. And we tried to control for multiple email addresses, and that's how we ended up in the 5 million records. Then we calculated the submission difference index, which is basically the difference between the number of submissions in the month of the first wave of lockdowns, February to May 2020, minus the average of number of submissions in the same months of 2018 and 2019. That would give us then a kind of a measure to see if people are submitting more or less than the previous years. Then we wanted to really focus on women. So we needed to also guess people's gender, because no submission system is asking for gender, at least up until recently. Actually, the pandemic also boosted the practice of asking people for gender for exactly these analyses. And we also heard in the previous presentation how important it is to look into the data in a gender segregated manner. So we used Python package gender guesser about first name and the country of affiliation. And then we also ran a separate gender API to guess the ones that the first Python package couldn't identify with precision. And that's how we ended up in guessing gender of 94.5% of that 5 million records of authors and reviewers in the database. Then we also wanted to see whether the impact was more pronounced for women with small children who had the school closure and daycare closure and elderly care on their shoulders next to their scientific and academic career. And for that, we used a kind of a scholarly age estimate, which is basically the number of years since people's first record in Scopus database, which is based on our assumption and several publications. The time people start to publish is around the time that they are in their PhD, MD formal training. So they are around 25, 30 years old. And then the cohort that we focused the most was the ones who had 20 years or less scientific age. And these would be the women in their early to mid 40s and 50s, potentially with school-going children, as well as elderly parents who needed extra care during the wave of lockdowns. So that's basically the method we used. Then what we found out was that the pandemic caused a race of publication. I think this is not a mystery anymore. Everyone knows that there was a tsunami of publication, that's not different for Elsevier journals. It was increased by 30% across different disciplines, and the field of health and medical sciences, it increased by 63% in comparison to the previous year. At the same time, the question is, okay, these number of submissions still require peer review effort. Do we see any increase in the reviewer invitation acceptance rate or not? We saw that the reviewer invitation acceptance also increased, so people voluntarily wanted to review the extra manuscripts coming to journals, and that was more or less on par with the increase in submission as the total. But when we focused on the field of health and medical sciences, again, we saw that the invitation acceptance rate was not increasing as much as the submission growth, and it all increased by 34%. So what we see here is the segregated data for women versus men. And as you can see, in these weeks between February to May in 2020, everyone, men and women, increased the number of submissions. But what we see here in comparison to the previous years is that women submitted in comparison to their men counterpart way less than the previous years. And when we looked into the peer review invitation acceptance rate, we saw that that kind of a gap doesn't seem to be in place. Now, as I mentioned, we focused also on the cohort of women of 0 to 20 years of academic career age. And we saw in all fields, health and medical sciences, life sciences, physical sciences, social sciences, and economics, women have been submitting proportionally less than their men counterpart. And you see that this is even more pronounced in the fields of health and medical sciences, physical sciences, and engineering. We saw that kind of a gap was not very much present in the scientific age group of more than 20 years, specifically in the fields of physical sciences and engineering, life sciences, social sciences, and economics, but still present when it was about health and medical sciences and research. So overall, we saw an increase in submission in 2020, but we also saw there was a considerable gap between women, specifically women of younger scientific career age than their men counterpart. Now, this was what we saw in the data, but we wanted to make sure that we are talking about robust and significant effect. So to check for the significance, we estimated a mixed effect model using author's gender and age to predict that submission difference delta. And in order to control for the fact that authors are based in different countries, in different institutions with different contagion prevention policies, we included a random effect for countries in the model as a geographical control. And we saw a statistically significant negative effect for women in all areas of research, which confirms what we saw in the data. And in addition, we found a consistent positive interaction effect between gender and age, meaning, again, the cohort of women of younger scholarly age have been penalized the most. Also to test the hypothesis that this is because of the school closures, we used Google COVID-19 Community Mobility Report, which tracks the amount of time spent by mobile phone users in different places, including residential areas, and gives an index that basically calculates the different time rates spent by individuals in residential areas in a given day in comparison to the median value of January 2020. And we calculated the average value of the February to May 2020 period of the residential area index, which was quite high in comparison to the previous years. And then we did it per country to see how scholars' mobility has been impacted by lockdown measures, so that we could actually connect our findings to the school closures, daycare closures, elderly care closures and stuff. And again, we realized that indeed we see a negative interaction between gender and time in residential area, specifically when we are looking into submissions for health and medical sciences and physical sciences and engineering. So again, young women, the model also confirms, have been penalized the most. Obviously, we had some limitations. First and foremost, we only looked into Elsevier journals, which covers only 20% of the entire published body of science. We were unable to adequately represent non-binary identities because no gender guesser is able to identify non-binaries. We are also not we are aware that the way we estimated the scientific age was not perfect. Obviously, there were groups of people who didn't have their publication as formal training, or they were the recently graduating students who published for the first time during the pandemic, so we could not make use of that. That's another limitation. And of course, when we use Google Mobility report, there were two layers of limitation. One, not everyone had mobile access, and two, obviously some countries didn't even at the country level have any data available. Some African countries include, and also China and Iran were included in the countries where we couldn't actually check. But overall, what we saw across the globe, women are being penalized the most due to lockdown measures and lack of the support needed when lockdown happens for women of age of having family duties and household duties next to their academic career goals. So this brings me to some discussion points. Obviously, this is like 3 years ago, and as Vibhuta also mentioned, things started back then, but the gap that for decades and even decennia have been pushed so hard to be closed started to widen again, and that is no surprise when it comes to the women in academia. So all those submissions that men did more than women eventually gets publication and citation included. And that basically starts to inflate the gap in higher education when it comes to tenure tracks or applications for prestigious positions. And this is something of a worrying for everyone. I think funding agencies, hiring and promotion committees should be very cautious about this gap that started because women didn't have enough opportunity to do the research and submit papers during the pandemic as their men counterpart had. And possibly in some fields like physics, it is wise to ponder and even disregard COVID-related publications and citations because of the gap and unleveled playing field that it was creating. And I think another important message is that institutions need to intervene, need to promote more diverse and inclusive, equitable working environment. And they need to also embrace family-friendly leadership policies so that they can help women who were hit the most during the pandemic can continue with their career goals and thrive in the post-pandemic environment. Now, the data set that we used is a unique one. And after the study, I thought we should be making this available for extra research. It has such a rich breadth of information that many can start running research on the data. So that's why we launched last year Peer Review Workbench, which is a specialized workbench inside ICSR lab, Elsevier's lab for running research on research. It is dedicated to evidence-based research on peer review in an environment which enables researchers to run in a trustworthy and safe environment their hypothesis. And it allows for evidence-based analysis on scholarly publishing at large scale. The entities of the dataset are all described in our white paper, which is available. The QR code is on the slide, and I hope you can find more by looking at it. It's on our preprint channel SSRN. In short, the data includes submission dates, article types, submission dates, as I said, the keywords, decision status of the manuscripts, decision dates for the accepted articles, the abstract, the number of co-authors, the author position, first, last, and the author's country of affiliation and gender inferred. For the peer review data, we have reviewer invite, accept, and completion dates. We have reviewer decision and recommendation, and the reviewer country of affiliation and gender. The same goes for editorial decision, so editor role, editor decision date, editor country of affiliation and gender. And at the journal level, we have the journal subject areas and impact factor quartiles. If you would like to apply, again, the QR code takes you to the site for more information on how to apply. We only accept protocols that asks you to identify your primary and secondary objective, the reporting guidelines that need to be followed, your method, the required data set attributes, sample size, calculation, statistical analysis plan, and any competing of interest, funding information, code availability statements. And where relevant, we also encourage the applicants to embrace inclusivity in the group of researchers they want to work with. And we also encourage everyone to publish their accepted protocols as well as follow-up publications in the same SSRN channel that we have our white paper in there. And we have an academic advisory board who look into the applications and provide extra detailed suggestions on how to improve the application even further. We recently got Dr. Rachel Hayard on board. We have Anna Mariušić as a professor from University of Split. We have Dr. Mario Malički from Stanford, and my previous co-author, Francesco Grimaldo, is also on board, and I'm chairing this. Thank you so much.
Lilia, you are probably muted.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, sorry. Thank you very much also for such a detailed analysis. And there are already some questions. So at this moment, we have this 15 minutes session for questions. So I'm going to read, or Vandana, you want to do this, or?
Sorry, question. Oh. Yeah, I will just pull a list. Let me just get, okay.
I have the question.
Yeah, so Shurvati, yeah.
Okay. So there is a question which says that, I will take from the,
yeah, come there.
We have some comments.
Question, yeah. So first is, no, that's a comment that COVID-19 took the world by surprise with women bearing the brunt of the negative side effects. What proactive measures can be put in place so that vulnerable and indeed everyone is saved from the deaths and excruciating experiences of COVID-19 should any other pandemic occur? So maybe that's for Vibhuti.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is not to hide information, first of all. Whatever is the reality, I think that has to be communicated to the people so that unnecessarily panic that happens doesn't happen. Number two, it is a health emergency. You can't call it curfew because then the criminal justice system, especially the police, gets enormous power to brutalize and criminalize people, especially those who are homeless, those who are on the road, those who don't have luxury to be, who are not in gated community. Number three, that essential service. What do you consider as essential service? It is not only COVID as essential service. All the comorbidities, whether they are cancer or tuberculosis or heart condition, blood pressure, all of these conditions, they require emergency attention, and also the reproductive health needs of women. So that is very important. Fifth one is that the kind of, hello? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And the other one is that the state has to collaborate with the civil society organizations because they are at the forefront of this thing. Another thing, more leadership of women in the healthcare industry, whether as a doctor or scientist or technician or support staff or nurses, all of them, they should be taken into consideration because they are the ones who are in touch with the patients who are confronting
ఇది లోపల కూర్చొని ఎవరితో మాట్లాడకుండా తింటికి బయటకు వచ్చి వెళ్తున్నాను కొంచెం ఫీలింగ్ తో వచ్చి ఏదైనా చేయను అంటే నేను బయటకి
Please mute yourself.
Yeah. Please, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So that is there. And in terms of the macro policies, whenever the health emergency takes place, social sector budgeting has to be increased. And you have to see that if the new methods of either employed in education, then you have to see that people who are at the margin are not left out. How are we going to get them back to the educational institution because of the digital divide that has been created? So I think people have to work together. Professional organizations, state elected representatives, civil society organizations, and healthcare professionals. We have to take everybody's opinion into consideration, and information technology has made it much easier to communicate. So instead of using force, and all the human rights protocol evolved by UNHRC, United Nations Human Rights Council, they must be implemented at the time of emergency also. You just can't withdraw them and just use the language of coercion and brutal violence against the common people. No? That's very important.
Next question. So, Lydia, you would like me to read the next question?
Oh, yes, please.
So the next question is, who are Ayabais?
Ayabais are below sanitation worker, above sanitation worker, below nurses. They are the auxiliary nurses and midwives. They have got short-term training, but they are extremely crucial for any kind of health emergency because actually dealing with the organic matter and all that they do, and they have a really basic knowledge of the emergency management. No? Yeah.
So the next question is, we see a total change in the attitude of students towards their studies. Can you please throw some light on this change in the behavioral pattern? Any reported study on this so far?
In fact, all the teachers are extremely worried about this new attitude of children for any, if it rains, they don't want to go to college. If it is there is it's too much of heat, they don't want to go to college. For 2 years, they did not have exams, so they don't want written exam. They have lost ability to do handwriting. So paper which they were earlier clearing in 90 minutes for 50 marks paper, they are now demanding 2 hours. So constantly students have now got used to, and plus online, anytime, anywhere, and anybody can study. That approach has made students face-to-face, like that whole, they call it embedded way of teaching, classroom teaching as well as teaching online. I think that has also created a very different mindset among students, mainly of the upper stratum of society, because the lower stratum of society did not get the opportunity to study during the pandemic because they did not have digital connectivity. If there was one smartphone, it went to the boy, and the girl was out. So girl could not get. So there are different challenges for different segment of students. Students from the underserved community, they don't want to be into forced child labor. They want to get to the school, and school also gives them midday meal. So for the poverty groups, those who are 40% of the population, student population, which is below the poverty line pyramid, they want to get back to school because it is not only education, they also get hot and fresh meal by the state, midday meal. It's a major attraction for the students because the starvation is a major challenge they are facing. So the response is very different. People from the students from the upper strata, they have now become very demanding when it comes to, they don't want to charge travel time and all that. They want to reduce and they want to have a shortcut. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to add one small point here.
Yeah.
We had one satellite workshop just a day before the main conference began on the digital teaching and also effect of pandemic. And in tomorrow's networking session, Madhurima, who is one of the coordinators of this workshop, will actually present a short summary on some of the recommendations from the workshop. So this is for all the participants, so that we'll hear more about what happened to the teaching in COVID, as well as the impact of the digital teaching, because you have actually already pointed out again the inequity in the digital, which is a very reality. So just wanted to tell that about tomorrow's program. So sorry.
So Vibhuti, next question is related to this, what you said, that were any measure taken or proposed for the large number of girls that were out of the school during the period?
Yeah, and I think it has to be that you have to have a three-pronged approach for bringing back girls to school, pulling them out of child labor, okay, because that has happened, because the poverty, the percentage of below poverty line population has increased due to pandemic. So many girls are forced into forced child labor. Second one is the trafficking. At a major challenge that we are facing is that in all Asian countries, all the poor countries, is a massive trafficking of girls that has happened due to distress and also forced marriages. In one district of Maharashtra, which is the most progressive state, 6,500 girls were married off in 1 year, child marriage, who are below 18. So unless we deal with the trafficking, forced child labor and forced child marriages, and also forced motherhood, because that girl, she becomes pregnant in 1 or 2 years. So all these 4 issues have to be tackled with to bring them back to the school, every child in the school. And for that, several local self-government bodies, like the municipal corporation, urban and rural local self-government bodies, elected representatives in the local self-government bodies, and the Ministry of Education, Department of Education at a subnational level, because education is on the concurrent list. Central union government gives money, while the state governments, they implement it, no? And they also pitch in. So I think that effort has to be there, and several other experiments. Not only that you expect them to go to school, even the flexi time you will have to have if the parents are working and they are not ready to send them to school. So there are so many methods of non-formal education which is created even during the pandemic, where the local organizations, even in the slums, they were running the school, no? Some of the community-based organizations, where they were making the students sit at the 1.5 meter distance, and in one room, they would be taking 5 or 10 students and several batches, 6. So all such new creative experiments which the organizations had, I think they can be used. And now we have a massive audiovisual resources, no, which are generated by the educational institutions, the knowledge resources. We have a MOOCs, we have EPG Pathshala, means the University Grants Commission, they also have it. And I'm sure all countries have created massive, Bangladesh has a massive e-resources, which can be just seen on and learned on the smartphone, no? So I think those resources can also be applied to see to it that whatever setback we have had over the last 2 years is compensated, and we can move the wheels of history in a direction of progress and sustainable development goal number 2.
Thank you. Next, there was a comment for Bahar that the QR code is no longer valid or available. So, and then there
I'm
was...
sorry, I just saw that comment and I answered with a link to the article. I'm going to put the links in in the chat as well, so everyone can have access to it. My bad.
And I think then there was a question on if you have included only the Elsevier journals, and probably the answer is given in the next question. So if you can.
Yes, it was only Elsevier journals because that is the data set I had access to because I'm working at Elsevier. I don't have any access to any other, journals that are published by other societies or publishers. And I encourage all of them to do the same analysis, but we did our own homework.
I move to the next question. Did you look into, which is also for Dr. Bahar, did you look into differences depending on a certain region? I would think that the gaps mentioned could have additional information.
We did not look into certain regions because we have to be realistic. What we collect in terms of information about people's affiliation is what people provide upon submitting a paper. So anyone who has an experience of submitting a paper, they go through registration form, they put their email addresses and country of affiliation, and that's it. There is no extra layer of detailed information about people's race and ethnicity or the region they are working on. This is all like bits and pieces that we learned by doing that would come very handy for policymakers, for decision makers, if we would have the data. And since late last year, we have introduced gender and race and ethnicity in our submission system so that anyone who registers can, of course, prefer not to disclose, but if they choose to prefer disclose it, then we can run an analysis at this scale to say that effect had such an impact on this group. So that's a short answer to say. For now, we don't have any.
And the next question is how the gap created during the pandemic can be bridged. So probably you answered a little bit of that, and would like to make any extra comment? Or?
I think just by raising awareness, all policymakers, decision makers should know that the gap between women and men in academia just got bigger. And then, as I mentioned, when they are evaluating candidates for any promotion, any hiring, they should ponder on the period of publication, specifically during the pandemic.
So the next question is also related to that. Are comparative statistics done which consider the ratios of female and male before and after COVID? Is there a relative smaller effect seen when considering male publications in submission and publication acceptance?
We did not do the analysis in publications, so we only looked into submissions. But when we did look into the submissions, we did the comparative analysis, and that was in the first graph I showed. So you could compare men versus women submissions in the same weeks of 2018-2019, and then what happened in 2020, which was quite a bigger gap. And then we showed through the models that the gap is quite significant. In terms of publication, we don't have the follow-up study yet, but we are planning to do that. Specifically, 3 years forward, we could also look into the citations and see whether men who got more submissions and eventually more publications out of it, do they also get more citations, or women who submitted less get more or less the same number of citations or not. That's a follow-up study.
So I wanted to something which is that, all of us felt, and many of us who are in the editorial boards of journals, and even we have felt that there is a referring delay during this period. So if are you planning to do any study on that, and delay in getting responses from reviewers? And
yes, it is quite clear that peer review, and we also saw that in the data that researchers obviously deprioritized doing peer review during the pandemic because there were so many other things that they needed to get their heads around. Although peer review invitation acceptance rate increased in comparison to previous years, it was not on par with the tsunami of publications, specifically in the health and medical sciences. And what we see now is in the fields of social sciences and economics, which is basically the main topic of, again, what Vibhuti was mentioning, like all the impacts on different aspects of society is creating so much food for thought that we see that now that kind of a tsunami is happening in the social sciences and economics in 3 years forward. In terms of things to do to increase the peer review speed, I think one way of increasing peer review speed is expanding beyond the existing reviewer pool. I encourage all editors to look beyond the existing reviewers. You have already exhausted them. And they are not only reviewing for your journal, they are probably reviewing for all the other journals as well. So try to look at the journal authors list, people who have published with you, and try to see whether they are reviewing for your journal or not. We have done experiments and showed that recently accepted authors have really high reviewer invitation acceptance rate in comparison to the journal existing reviewer pool. So trying to just introducing more diverse group of potential reviewers to your journal by reaching out to your recently accepted authors in conferences, inviting people to volunteer to come and join your reviewer pool would be one way of expediting the process.
So, okay, I don't think we have any questions. There is a request to share your slides. And I hand over to Lilia for the next talk. And if there is a question, we can take later.
Yes, thank you for your questions and the answers. And thank you, Shruva, for helping me with this. So now we continue the session with the presentation of Professor Frances Separovic. Okay, so I will introduce her. So Frances Separovic is a biophysical chemist and deputy director of the Bio 21 Institute at University of Melbourne, Australia. Frances became the first woman professor of chemistry in 2005 and head of a school at 2010 at the university, and the first female chemist elected to the Australian Academy of Science in 2012, of which she is now Foreign Secretary. She was inducted into the Victorian Honour Roll of Women in 2018 and appointed an officer of the Order of Australia in 2019. Frances is past president of the Biophysical Society in USA and president-elect of Division 1 of International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, IUP, and our sister or brother union, I don't know, but it's we have worked together. Okay, thank you very much for acceptance of this invitation. And please open the microphone.
Well, thank you, Lilia. I'm honoured to join this panel
Please.
of women.
Please.
Thank you. We are seeing your presentation screen with everything. I think you need to just show us the presentation. You are sharing with notes and everything.
Start again. All right. But so I'll do share screen.
Yeah.
But
Do
use another mode presentation.
Yeah.
That one. Perfect.
Thank you.
So, as is customary in Australia in forums like this, I wish to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people, traditional owners of the land on which the Academy is located today. I extend this acknowledgement to all First Nation peoples around the world as custodians of knowledge critical to understanding our world and informing our decisions. So what I'm going to talk about today are the key findings of a report of research on women in the Asia-Pacific area conducted by the Australian Academy of Science. The report explores the impacts on STEM careers and individual well-being and identifies the way organisations and individuals within the STEM system can support. In 2021, at the request of the Australian Government, the Academy investigated the impacts of COVID-19 on women in the STEM workforce in the Asia-Pacific region to help us understand the impacts, uncover solutions, and offer ways the STEM system can work together for the gender equity we have long sought to improve. This report clearly showed that the pandemic had exacerbated pre-existing gender inequity in the STEM workforce across the region, and in cases continues to do so in the post-pandemic recovery. So I'll talk a little bit about the methods that we use. So in this project, 865 women from 31 Asia-Pacific economies were interviewed, or interviewed or did. 80% had postgraduate qualifications, 53% work at a university, and 40% do research. 49% have permanent positions. So we reported 20 stories from 9 economies, and there were 4 key experiences. And these were finding the positive when working from home, balancing domestic and professional responsibilities, dealing with sharper gender-based inequities, and using online technologies to has had a significant impact on women in STEM across the Asia-Pacific. 59% said personal passion was the reason they would stay in STEM. 56% of women with caring responsibilities had access to flexible work, and we need more flexible work arrangements and measures of work productivity to support women. 39% of early career women in long-term contracts and had less secure work environments. 50% reported negative health impacts in relation to work or home life, and 30% reported increase in workload and decrease in productivity, as we've heard from our preceding speaker. So I'm trying to make it go to the next. This seems to be working. Okay. 4 themes were revealed in the data that reflected the impacts on women in STEM in the Asia-Pacific region, which we will explore in more depth. I'll go through each of the 4 individually. The 4 were employment and career opportunities and gender inequity at work, challenged boundaries, social and individual well-being and impacts on mental health, and fourthly, these are global issues which impact both the Asia-Pacific region and beyond. So the main work findings. The first finding on employment and career opportunities and gender inequity at work showed that women in STEM have less secure employment, so are more susceptible to job loss. COVID-19 has exacerbated gender inequity in STEM workplaces as women balance work and non-work responsibilities. And women are actually reluctant to leave STEM, but the lack of career opportunities in their careers is the main reason that they would leave. The call to action for the wider STEM sector and individual workplaces include acknowledgement of the existing disparities and development of baseline measures to understand inequity in organisations, maintain existing diversity and equity activities and evaluate them, develop flexible and inclusive workplaces for all genders, and develop flexible measures to measure productivity and success in STEM, not just the number of publications. Sorry. Then the second one about challenge boundaries. The second finding on challenge boundaries showed that COVID-19 restrictions such as lockdowns blurred the boundaries between work and home as there were widespread adoption of work from home. Many women experienced a substantial increase in the overlapping of work and home spheres has significant impact on women's productivity and capacity to research. So the call to action includes the need to deepen understanding and awareness of the impact of increased online engagement on work and personal lives. Ensuring digital accessibility and support to all. Involve all women across organisations in making changes to workplace culture and conditions. The need for accessible and affordable childcare and paid parental leave, and further support for the development of new skills for online teaching and collaboration. The third focus area was on social change and individual well-being, highlighting how mental health has been impacted by isolation, managing competing priorities, and lack of opportunity to switch off. Individuals' opportunity to feel part of their community and access support networks has also been affected. Women with caring responsibilities and those who reduce their working hours have been particularly affected. The organisations and society need to acknowledge individual health and well-being as priorities, ensure access to mental health support, and now and in the post-pandemic recovery, take flexible approaches to better respond to individual circumstances, explore and develop professional support networks, and offer flexibility and grant extensions where possible for grant applications and research deliverables that recognise the specific impact of COVID-19 on women. So the more global issues, the final major finding that was clear was that these are not just the Asia-Pacific Pacific issues, these are global issues impacting the world. Of course, that's what global means. But women globally are affected by the recovery as well. The pandemic has led to the rise of common social changes across all economies, and as such, global solutions are required. Different parts of the region share different perspectives of capacity in the economy to respond and their access to infrastructure. Then regional strategies and collaboration are needed. This led to the following call to action. The need to drive ongoing commitment and action to advance the APEC Women in STEM principles. Economies and communities to the UN Beijing Declaration 1995 and the SDGs, and, as aspired in their frameworks, track progress on gender equity. Create opportunities to share best practice among economies in the region, including consideration of the International Science Council's initiative to address the gender gap in science and mathematics, and leverage existing domestic strategies that address gender equity in STEM and use them as a blueprint to extend their reach throughout this region. So this report is downloadable, and there's also a QR code here. So if you wish, I know the session is being recorded, but you could take a picture of the screen. The report's on the Academy's website. And also at the end of last year, what we did is launch STEM Women Global. The Australian Academy of Science, with support from partners, including the Inter-Academy Partnership, or IAP, launched STEM Women Global. STEM is an online global directory of women working in STEM and aims to promote gender equity in STEM by showcasing the breadth of scientific talent throughout the globe, enabling a diverse range of women to be offered exciting opportunities to progress their careers and personal capabilities. It's a resource built for both experts and seekers of expertise. Seekers can search for experts based on their expertise, location, interested opportunities, and other diversity attributes, and experts can be shortlisted throughout the search process and message directly from STEM Women Global. So visit the site, stemwomen.global, and you can connect with opportunities, but also set up a profile today. I have already. So we all acknowledge the importance of diversity. But why is it important to address these issues in the post-pandemic STEM system? Well, we know it's because excellent demands diversity. Diversity teams are more effective and crucial for optimizing performance and powering the innovation and invention needed to drive a knowledge economy. STEM-based industries are amongst the fastest growing in Australia, where even a 1% increase in people choosing a STEM career could contribute over $57 billion Australian to the economy over 20 years. A diverse STEM workforce is a crucial investment in Australia's future national development. Plus, we have a Women in STEM decadal plan, which is from the government. And again, that is also available through both the Academy website and the government website. So I thank you for letting me speak with you today. And hopefully we've raised a few questions, but I think the three of us have presented a lot in common. And we can see that there's differences both in Europe, across the Asia Pacific region, and also the specific case of India, which is a huge economy. So thank you very much. And let's have a healthy discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Francis, for this also presentation, very interesting. So the panel is open for questions, comments for the rest of the session. We invite you to share your thoughts, your opinions, concerns, suggestions we can do.
So
Yes.
Can we go to the questions?
Yeah, can we take the question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, there was a question, I think, which Francis can also answer. Comparison of the effects between poorer regions and richer regions. Are the consequences more dramatic for poorer regions at all levels, scientific research, outreach activities, etc.? This is a question from A. Zacharias.
Well, the answer, of course, is yes, but I cannot give you the specifics. And it's very different, even within Australia, different across different states and different cities. Different universities respond differently. But and the impact really continues. And the working from home, I think, is a particular difficulty that is still happening. And we see it in my workplace, the loss of connection between the people who work more at home and those who arrive on a more regular basis. So I'm sorry, I can't help you with the specifics, but yes, every country, every economy just responded differently.
So I don't see any other question in the QA. There are some comments, but yeah. So thank you for excellent presentations to the three speakers from Lorena. Yeah. So then back to me. So I think it's open to questions. So please type your questions and comments.
Comments. Yes, I would like to comment. I see that there are some specific policies to support in some countries, but then I wonder why or how can we implement some of the suggestions, as for example, as this taking into account this period of publications, which was all this has shown, those presentations had shown that there is a stronger effect on women. So I was wondering how we can convince our institutions, for example, our agencies, all the evaluators to take into account this, because at least I see that for knowing about some comments from colleagues from around the world, there is no specific measurement. At least in many countries, I don't see any specific policy to take into account the impact. So I was wondering, and I want to ask also to the attendees if they know about any specific program to overcome or to take into account this. Like, for example, in our country, they evaluate about taking into account the number of papers and things like that. So I don't see any, transient policy to take into account this. Okay. So yes, that's a comment and a question if you have any clue about this. Thank you. Anyone to comment or say something about this?
There are now some comments and questions has come. So one is, there are several consequences in health due to COVID that address loss of concentration and that can't be measured or proved. Have your countries include some policy about it? So this is on loss of concentration.
Lilia, I can tell you about things that I hear in the Netherlands about measuring performance. There is a big discussion at the universities level on diversifying the success measures beyond the number of publication, looking into teaching duties, looking into the peer review activities, even moving away from the normal way of preparing CVs and requesting to have a narrative CV. I think those kind of activities eventually would open space to ponder about the impact of papers that are just listed as achievements.
I think for the first
Thank you.
time, thank you for this question, because this is a universal problem faced right from the early childhood education, school education, and university education in the post-pandemic period. And for the first time, Union budget has acknowledged the item called mental health. So there is a massive allocation of 7,400 million rupees for this thing. And the Apex Institute called NIMHANS in Bangalore, they are going to moderate this. And first approach is that of a community-based mental health services, counseling services, and also in educational institution, also counseling services, plus those who don't want to go for a very, very abstract and very intense education, there is a more and more program on skill development. So those who want to shift from a skill-based education and vocational education. So these are some of the changes are coming in a post-pandemic period because of the national education policy, which was also introduced during the pandemic only in 2020, and which is completely overhaul of the education, the whole pedagogic method of imparting knowledge, more and more experiential learning, more and more applied part of learning, and multiple ways of education, not only by the lecture method. So all these things, the new methods, they are coming up. And that's why more flexibility has been now operationalized in the post-pandemic period. But the concentration has become a problem for this student. 45 minutes of concentration, they are unable to, because they have been used to online method of teaching, and in which most of them were keeping their video off. So they were doing a lot of other things rather than listening to lectures and all. So you have to involve students and more teamwork, project work, activity-based teaching that has been adopted in pedagogy.
Thank you.
So for that, Lydia, yes, you.
No, go ahead, Sue.
So
There are more questions.
a very good point, which has come after pandemic, this poor concentration span, and more with the social media and reels and all. So I think it's very, very important point. Now, another question is that from Francisca Okeke. Okay, the question has vanished. So I will go to the next question from Wendy. Not a specific COVID policy, but the changes to accepting the DORA strategy has changed how publishing is used in promotion cases in the UK. It's somehow it started vanishing from my screen from which I was reading. I will read from that screen maybe. So Gillian is saying the impact, particularly on education, could last for many years. How do we ensure such discussions and efforts to mitigate the effects are kept in the spotlight?
Anybody, you are going to answer this?
Yeah.
Or anyone? Yes, please.
Can you repeat the question?
The impact, particularly on education, could last for many years.
Yes.
How do we ensure such discussions and efforts to mitigate the effects are kept in the spotlight?
So I think the Generation Equality Forum, in which decision makers of 64 countries came together, and the education was topmost on the agenda because we call 21st century as a knowledge economy. So I think the intensive effort by both the formal and non-formal methods, the multiple methods of education that has to be there, plus those who have been out of school and for 2 years they have not studied for 2 years. So for them, you will have to have a very intensive Teach One Each One program, Teach India program that we have, where you concentrate, they are not 40-50 students sitting in a class, but you get an intensive attention, no? So those kind of approaches, and where civil society organizations and the NGOs, they have to play a very important role. In fact, the government is depending so much on the retired teachers. People like us are busy 24/7, even after our retirement, mainly to see to it that this reality, the challenges can be made, and the faculty induction program, faculty improvement program, special hand-holding bridge courses for the NGOs working in the community-based organizations, because 6 subjects are the subjects which are very difficult are science, maths, English. So because of which most of the students, they give up studies after 7th standard. So how to do hand-holding of the students and the mentoring program, where teacher or a volunteer has only 5 students to look after, so that you can give concentrated. So these kind of experiments are made, and I think at a subnational level, it is happening more. The different state governments have, most of the state governments have uploaded all the textbooks on the website, so that you can just download PDF even on your smartphone and all. And then you have a facilitator, the community-based facilitator, NGOs who are given the notebook as a computer. So students can go there, you can have a time. So the timetable is prepared for student-wise timetable, and they can also learn online, facilitated by the volunteers. No? So that has to be there. So because to bridge the gap of 2 years of being forced out of, the term which is used is not dropped out, they're forced out of schools education system because of the circumstances. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else wants?
So there is one question, which is
sorry.
that, how have you ensured that okay, sorry, Lilia, I sorry, you can finish that discussion, then I will read. Yeah.
No, yes, I wanted to ask the rest of panelists if they want to make a comment of this question, on this question. No? No? Okay. So go ahead.
Okay. So the question is, how have you ensured that the wonderful ideas in your action will be implemented? Probably this is for Francis.
Sorry, I was just trying to type a link to the Women in STEM Decadal Plan. So it's not, the link isn't working, but when I do it, it works. But when I do it through Zoom, it's not working. So maybe if it's typed out properly. So for example, in Australia, we do have the Women in STEM Decadal Plan, and we're moving towards certain goals. We also have champions, which is really helpful, leaders, especially males who champion the cause. The institutions themselves have goals that they have to achieve a certain percentage or a certain improvement at different levels. We have the equivalent of Athena's Swan in Australia as well. And the granting bodies are also encouraging a certain proportion. For example, when we have the most senior fellowships, there's about 12 or 14 of them. Actually, I think there was originally 12, and of course they were nearly all male. So they made 2 specifically for women. And you know very much that when people on research panels, on promotion panels, they are actively discussing ways of improving gender equity, which is a huge change compared to the 90s when I came into the university system. So it's a very encouraging. It's still difficult. There's a long way to go, but I think, you know, there is a light on the horizon in Australia especially, and I hope in your countries as well.
Any other question or comment?
I don't see any other question.
No.
There was a comment on DORA strategy. So
Yes.
would you like me to read it, Lilia?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so there was a comment that, let me just find it, that not a specific COVID policy, but the changes to accepting the DORA strategy has changed how publishing is used in promotion cases in the UK. And then there are some other comments on these, that Spain has adopted the DORA strategy. And so
can anybody comment about this DORA strategy?
yeah,
If no.
Lilia, I think it is in relation to your question about how institutions can factor in the impact of COVID. With DORA, there is specific guidelines on how to interpret publications and the citations and stuff. So it's moving away from, you know, impact factor, journal impact factors and H indexes, and really looking into the contributions of individuals. And I think that's one way of answering your question in terms of how policy and decision makers can ensure that they are expanding their metrics beyond just the number of publications in high impact factor journals. Yeah.
Okay, great to know that we are moving to another.
I also,
yes, please go, Francis, please.
it's something that I bring up a lot. It's something that annoys me at no end. You know, when you have discussions like promotion, like grants and stuff, when people start quoting the H index, and I actually make a pain of myself and I say, I'm sorry, my university is a signatory to the DORA thing and we cannot mention that. I cannot participate. Then they stop. Yeah. But, you know, they keep on going on about it. And I just find it so annoying when they introduce a speaker and say, this is their H index. And you go, and I'll put it in the chat. Why are you mentioning this? My university is part of DORA. You shouldn't be doing metrics and stuff. Anyway, yeah. So I think we should just keep niggling people. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. My colleagues all the time, oh yes, the H index and things like that. So, and our country, because of the government and this new government, well, not so new, but they're trying to implement new policies, and they are paying special emphasis on community service a lot. So what we are doing, not only a concern of publishing, but what we are doing to share our knowledge, what we are doing to improve scientific culture of the population, and things like that. So it's now a very heavy weight when evaluating grants, proposals, and things like that. So yeah, I think it's at the end we have to find the balance, right? Because on the other hand, if you get so much involved from these activities, you don't publish anymore and things like that. But I think that that's an important step to move forward, something different. As Kathy Foley said in our workshop, we have to change somehow the system, and we have to be very active in this, not waiting only for this new resolution, but trying to change at different levels in our institutions, government, and things like that. And I'm very glad that you are contributing to this at very different levels. So, yes.
Lilia Francisca has raised a hand, so I'm going to allow her to talk.
Yes, sure. Please. Francisca?
Thank you for observing my. Please, I want to just contribute from the question Lilia raised about the universe, or not only.
Hello?
Hello, I think we lost it.
Hello?
I suggest that most of us are representative of this university. I can suggest to the administration that we now sell it to National University Committee in different countries, that they have to include not only HNDS publication in high impact journal factors, but also from the assessment of the work of the people, which could be done as a questionnaire in each university, and to know how much you impart the knowledge, which is more important than publication. That's my suggestion. We can sell it, and they will now, the policymakers, we have to include it in their policy anytime they are trying to review the curriculum or their policy. Thank you very much.
And that is something that happens with our granting bodies. You are not allowed to state the impact factor of a journal when you submit the grant. It'll make it ineligible. Okay, so that's a way that you can do policy.
Screenshot of this. Did you do a screenshot? Just we also have all the panelists. We'll try to.
I have shared my PPT but I have access to only panelists and hosts. So I don't have access to everybody. So I think participants are not able to access the PPT. So will the host share it with the participants?
Yeah. I'm doing it. I'm doing on this.
Okay. Thank you.
So there is a comment?
Yeah.
No?
They are not.
Just try to take a screenshot at this point.
No, two more comments. Anonymous attendee. There is a comment in the question box.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the projects typically started for marginalized, do not stay for them. Common complaint is in getting funding. So the question here is, should marginalized, inclusive, these are used more as buzzwords? Should grant proposals ensure some stringent checks to ensure commitment to the words? That's the question.
Yes. For that, transparency is very important, no? And also it should be there in the SOPs, the standard operative procedure. At least in the social science, we have to. If you say the research ethical guidelines that are given, that whatever research you do, whether it will have a dialogical approach, informed consent, accountability to the stakeholders. We don't even call them subject, no, which was earlier the colonial masters called them subjects, but they are the respondent. And if they have responded to your research, you have a moral duty and ethical duty to share all the findings of yours, either through communication, like by organizing meeting, or by sharing the report in regional language, or by directly meeting the community. So I think that should be there in all the researches that we do. That's the only way to see to it that the research grant is used for the purpose it was granted. So whether the marginalized sections are benefiting it or not. And especially currently in the vaccine research and long COVID research and all that, there is a lot of opacity. So, and there are the organizations such as People's Health Assembly, Medico Friends Circle, or Indian Forum for Medical Ethics. They are raising these issues in the scientific community and also in the medical science community.
I would also like to follow up with comments. There are two principles now journals are trying to adopt. One is FAIR principle, and the other one is CARE principle. And that CARE principle exactly addresses the work done together with the indigenous people, for example, for collecting data, for acknowledging their role and their knowledge. And I think that also partly addresses the question about marginalized group and holding people who are running research or projects with them accountable.
And also a clause of no harm. The research findings will not harm the stakeholders. That is also now demanded.
Well, I guess we have a final comment by Ngozi Oxwelly. And I think this is for you, Mohammed. Why does it take so long in publishing in your journal? And how will you help the developing countries that doesn't have the state-of-the-art equipment to conduct a very good research to publish in your journals? Thanks. And this is, I think this is for you, Baha. Yes. I know
It's a very
difficult.
generic question. Probably I would not be the right person to answer. I can tell you this. It is not true that publications from lower income countries or global south have lower quality. That's just not true. And there are loads of studies that can prove the counter argument. Why is it taking too long? It's partly because of the peer review speed that we discussed in the discussions earlier. It's really difficult to find willing reviewers who would provide insightful comments to research. So it makes it really difficult for editors for any submission, specifically interdisciplinary submissions, to find good reviewers with knowledgeable understanding of the subject and then providing insightful comments to authors. If you have submissions that has been taking so long, like more than a few months, to get any information from the journal, it's your kind of responsibility to reach out to journals, send a message to the editor. All journals have their contact details on their website. Ask them, where is my manuscript? What has happened to it? Most responsible journals send notifications to authors when something happens to the manuscript. If you're waiting too long, just reach out. Sometimes things just fall into cracks without people knowing it. So take a step to reach out to journal editors, ask them about the status of the manuscript. And if the manuscript has not been even sent to peer review, say after half a year, then just withdraw your manuscript and take it somewhere else. You don't have to wait for so long for your manuscript to get a decision.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we have reached the end of our very interesting panel and very fruitful. I think we all together have learned a lot about all the impact, and the rest is to do what is assigned to each of us in trying to change or try to modify some regulations in every university, some trends and things like that, work intensively trying to convince our colleagues that they have to change that the way they look at the research and how to measure it. So with this, I would like to thank to our great panelists. Thank you very much for sharing all your work with us, and all the attendees also for being here with us and sharing their thoughts. Thank you very much. And there will be a report in the proceedings, so we can then think a little bit more about it. Okay. Thank you very much for all of you. Thank to the Shruva and Bandana for all the support and all the work for making this conference possible. Thank you. I'll see you in the post-presentation. I think you are going to say in the final words.
Yeah, just
okay. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia, and thank you, everyone. That was a really, thought-provoking discussion. We all have faced the repercussions in some way or the other, but there are sections who have faced maybe more than us. And there was a request to take a photograph with the panelists and the so whoever is in the screen now, if you can switch on your video, we will take. I see, Francis, you have already put a photo on Twitter, so I've seen that. So maybe, but
Kathy has raised hand, so we should allow her to speak. Give me a second.
Yeah,
Just give me a second to
okay, sure. By the time you
I think this screen is good to take picture, just with the full of.
This is not coming in my this thing. I was taking a screenshot. So
Let me take it. Let me take it.
I was taking a screenshot where everyone is coming, but this doesn't come so good. Screenshot is better.
Screenshot is print. Windows P.
Yes, Kathy. Vandana, you can unmute.
Yeah, I have unmute. I have
Kathy.
given Kathy allowed. this
Kathy,
thing. She
you can unmute yourself and
Kathy, I have given you privilege to unmute. Maybe she's not.
There we go.
Yeah.
Hello.
and you can switch on your video also.
Oh, okay. My video. I don't think I'm in properly to be able to unmute my. I haven't got the video set up. I think because I came in through the audience.
Oh, so you don't want?
I
you don't
think
want to
please go
comment?
ahead with the comment. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kathy, please go ahead with your comment.
Oh, I'm just saying that it's been really good listening to what's happening around relating to publishing. And I think the thing that's really interesting is that there is, with digital capabilities, the potential for us to really have stronger collaborations between different countries, particularly low socioeconomic countries that may not have the equipment, which one of the questions was asking about, and seeing how we might be able to partner in a way so that we can support different women in different places that may not have the same opportunities. I think this is a great opportunity for us to consider, maybe for Working Group 5, to think about how we might be able to set up better relationships so that we can sort of lift the research capabilities by partnering. And you don't have to travel. You can send your idea of an experiment to someone. We learned in COVID you can do that. And because it's the ideas and the analysis and the thinking that's really makes good science. You don't actually have to do the doing, although it's nice to do the doing if you're an experimentalist. But I think there's a great opportunity there. So that was probably my thought, is just to put into that conversation today.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. We are going to talk about this in the working group for sure. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, so I think we now come to the end of our panel discussion, and see you in the poster session.
And we will be back for the plenary session at 4:45 p.m.
Yeah.
Posters 2:30 to 4:30 and 4:45 plenary session, where we will hear from Kathy about publishing.
Excellent.
See
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. I
Thank you.
thoroughly enjoyed, learned a
Bye,
lot.
everyone.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much for all that you.
Yeah.
Thank
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 you.
you, Lina.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so
Bye-bye.
we are
See
going
you
to
soon.
the
Yeah.
poster
Very nice
session.
session. Very nice session, Lilia.
I think
Yeah,
I
like it.
look forward to the proceedings, because there were a lot of points said, about which we did not think. For instance, this delayed career progression of women and how it is going to be taken into account. I think that's a very, very